Well, guys, I think this is just recording, so we have to speak up.
You must know that Matthew is not only one of the most interesting actors, he also worked as a director. That might be explain his little action he just did. I had the chance to make an interview with him a couple of years ago, and I just had the idea to ask maybe some of the questions again now, just to see if something changed in your attitude, in your position. But just let me start out with asking you, how did you get involved in being an actor? Was it a childhood dream? Did you always knew that's the only thing? And how did it happen that you got your first role?
Well, I realized that I've lied about this a lot over the years. That I said that it was because my father, perhaps, you know the drive-in movies? The drive-in, where you drive the car in and watch the movies? This is what my father's profession was. He was a drive-in theater manager. I saw a documentary about the making of a film called Oliver, and I was really touched by it. Not by the profession, but I felt like that's who I was. I was like one of those orphan kids. Because we moved all the time, because they were tearing the drive-ins down to develop the land. The land was worth more than the drive-in theaters. And it was a time when cars began to get smaller, and television wasn't just 3 channels there were now 5 channels and 10 channels. And then with the advent of videotape, fewer and fewer people were going to see movies in drive-ins. But I think that the real reason I wanted to be an actor was because I wanted to meet girls and beat up bad guys. You know, I wanted to be a good guy and catch the bad guys. I think that's the truth. Was to meet girls and I wanted to be James Bond. It's very exciting. I mean, I think that there's a lot of guys in the room that can relate to that. Yeah.
Hands up.
I mean, you look at the girl in a James Bond movie and she wants to go to bed with you immediately. So you need to work out with the girl. I got married really young, so things, yeah. Yeah. I amazingly, in this business that I'm a part of, my marriage has survived. There's no scandals in my life. It's extraordinary, but I met an extraordinary woman, so I feel very lucky, to have met this incredible woman. And the bad guys thing, that started to change when I started to wonder, well, what really is a bad guy? That's an interesting question. To be able to look at things from different perspectives. And America, I was really lucky because early on in my profession, I had the opportunity to travel to the Berlin Film Festival with a film called Mrs. Soulful. I have to put this out because I can't breathe. I went to Berlin, and having grown up in Utah, in America, our favorite punching bag was the Russian people, because they were the evil empire. They were the bad people. They were the people that were going to destroy the world. And I had the pleasure of traveling into East Berlin, going across Checkpoint Charlie and into East Berlin, where I met Russian soldiers who shared their cigarettes with me, who gave me pins from their uniforms and didn't have horns on their heads. And they were just like my brother who had gone and fought in the Vietnam War. And this event, this moment in my life had a phenomenal impact on my perspective of the world. And, so from that point on, I always felt that before you point the finger and say, that's the bad guy, that you really need to look at your own reflection in the sense of your country's history and the crimes that your own country has committed before you say, that's the bad guy. Because Americans' history is something that we all know about, with what the people who founded that country did to the American Indians, the history of slavery in our country. And it's a country that not only used the atomic bomb once, but we used it twice. And so these are things that you really have to look at and scrutinize and say, who am I? You know. So pointing the finger is something that I take very seriously. That Jesus fella, you know, that Christ guy, that I played him in an Abel Ferrara film a couple of years ago, and it was interesting to just try to pull out all the bullshit that surrounds the history of this guy, who I think was a man, the same as you. He was a human being who existed, and because of the things that he said and the things that he did, he seemed to be able to divide time, that there's before him and there's after him. There's not another person that I can think of in the history. We had really good publicists, you know, the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England, to publicize his faith and who he was. But if you take all the bullshit away and just say, well, why was this guy kind of special? And it was those things that he learned maybe in the Himalayas from the Buddhists, who knows, you know, those missing years that some people think that because of his rabbinical teachings that he would have got as a young man, and then traveling for those missing years, that perhaps he went into the Himalayas and came back with a kind of Buddhist perspective on life. So he was somebody who became somebody who said, you know, before you throw stones, better have a look at yourself and say, do I have any sins? Because we're all guilty of something. You know, so it's kind of a brilliant thing to say. And by not having an army, by not having anything but love, he's a kind of an extraordinary guy. He's kind of like Mahatma Gandhi going down to the ocean and making salt. You know, that this was probably the biggest motivating factor to his movement in India, was making salt, you know, because the British had a tax on it, and he said this is an essential element of life and something that all of us have the right to make. But the British had a tax on it, and so they arrested him, and that got millions of Indians to support his cause. Just a little thing like making salt.
I have a question which is not
I'm
so
not a religious
philosophical.
guy. I think all these guys are just men, you know. I mean, sorry.
It's just about not about getting the girls, but about the hitting the bad guys part. Isn't it funnier, more interesting to play a bad guy than a good guy?
Is it more interesting to play a bad guy? I don't know. I think Peter Lorre was one of the greatest bad guys ever. I mean,
He's a sweet bad guy.
Yeah. I mean, or not M, the...
M, yeah.
Yeah, M. Playing, I don't know. Playing is fun. You know, it's like being a kid, pushing a little toy truck around. You know, there was a point when I was living in Los Angeles, and I was trying to think if I could create a periodical chart. You know, the periodical chart. If I made a periodical chart of actors and could really scientifically look at the history of this profession from the beginning till now, and